So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Rowan, the President of Franchise Business Review. And most people, I think, may know us from our FBR Franchisee Satisfaction Awards or the top guides that we put out at the different expos for candidates and that are available online. But we work with over 800 brands, and the majority of our clients actually use the information that we collect for them operationally. So to measure franchisee feedback and to use that in understanding how to reset expectations or help build relationships with their franchisees. So we decided that we were going to share some of the best practices that we've learned from the top brands that we work with. And I'm joined today by our founder and CEO, Eric Stites, that is going to help us talk about some different ideas for you guys to think about. It is 30 minutes. We're going to try and get through our content very quickly and leave a few minutes at the end for questions. There's a chat function or a question box on the right-hand side that you can use, and we have someone monitoring it. So if you have specific questions for us, throw them at us, and we will try and answer them as we go or hold them to the end or answer you directly if it's not something for the whole group. So we definitely encourage you guys to ask those questions. So with that, I'm going to turn things over, Eric, and let you get us started with the first point.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Want to get right in here with point number one, and Michelle already kind of introduced it, with setting realistic expectations. And one of the things that we see very often in our research is that franchisees, for various reasons, come into their franchise business with unrealistic expectations. Oftentimes that centers around financial expectations, but it doesn't have to be limited to just the financial expectations. Many franchisees have never owned a business before. They don't know what owning a business is necessarily like, so there's a huge learning curve there. And we find that many franchise companies really kind of, I guess, oversell on the front end. And it goes back to Michael Dell and the under-promising and over-delivering is really what you want to be in a situation, and make sure that your franchisees do have realistic expectations coming in. One of the things that's really important to keep in mind, we do an annual survey of franchisors, and obviously we're surveying franchisees all the time on levels of optimism and how optimistic they are about their business and where their business is going in the next 12 months. And the needle moves up and down a little bit depending on what's happening in the economy and other things happening in your various industries. But what we always see is this large gap between franchisee optimism and franchisor optimism. And that's something that you really have to understand and make sure that your corporate staff really understands that franchisees are living this business every day. They're on the front lines. They have a lot of bad days, as many good days and bad days. And it's hard when you're in the corporate office. You get excited about your products and your services and your brand, and sometimes you lose connection with the franchisees and some of the challenges that they have on a daily basis. And if corporate staff, especially support staff, aren't really in tune with that, and the franchisees are having a bad day or having challenges, and the corporate support staff calls up and is overly optimistic and excited about the business, that can that really rubs people the wrong way. So it's important to understand that franchisees have a lot on the line. They've invested their life savings in many cases, and for corporate staff and support staff to be really empathetic to that and understand business ownership has a lot of stress and pressure, and not to take it personally when a franchisee may snap or may not jump on board right away when you have some new idea or new product or new service that you're trying to roll out. Again, it's just a lot for them to consider. So keeping that in mind really helps, I think, the franchisor relationship, and setting those expectations up front. A lot of times, again, it's the franchisee comes into the business with these false expectations of what the business may do financially or otherwise. And even if it's something that you can say to the franchisee that set those false expectations, you just have to make sure that they have realistic expectations before they sign on the dotted lines, that you're crystal clear with what your business model is all about, the work hours, the effort that it takes to really build that business over time, financially, what can your business provide realistically, And and you want to certainly talk about those best case scenarios, but also talk about the most likely scenario, because that again is going to be the most likely scenario for most of your franchisees.
All right, so I will take the second point on creating transparency. So I think that the first point to make, and I know that we have an audience of ops people, is to make sure that on the team is being transparent with what's to come once they join the system. There seems to be a disconnect commonly between ops and development teams, and I think that we're seeing more of operations folks being able to get involved on that development side, as far as not necessarily vetting candidates, but being part of what's being told to them, or meeting the candidates at least before they come on board. But a way that you guys on the operations side can help set those expectations up front on the front end is through your item 19. So if you guys are working on collecting information from your franchisees on their financials, a great thing to do is to make sure that you're sharing those financials amongst the franchisees. So sharing as much information as you can amongst the group helps your whole system identify who are those top performers, so that I can identify who I can learn those best practices from. But what's the best case scenario for my business? What am I doing wrong? Are my operations expenses out of whack? Is my rent out of whack? And being able to really identify areas where they could help impact my bottom line. If I'm in the middle of the pack, or I'm at the bottom and I really want to decrease my costs and really increase my profitability. So having that intel and sharing that transparency on the back end gives your whole team better information to provide in that item 19 or throughout that disclosing process of bringing the candidate on board, and really shows that you guys are an open and transparent organization, that you're giving them these tools that are going to help them learn from other people's mistakes or from their successes. So I think that the financial transparency is crucial. I know that a lot of brands that we talk to, if they're smaller or if they're just starting out, they're implementing that as a requirement, that people are sharing that information back to the corporate office in more detail. But even retroactively, if it's not something if it tends to be something that your franchisees aren't comfortable with, start by getting people to opt in and getting that information and sharing it amongst the people that do opt in. And I think you can slowly get people to understand the value of providing those financials back and learning from others. The next thing is really this whole idea that we talk about with our survey process, but it applies to everything, is you need to measure what you're doing, or what the franchisees, how they feel you're doing. You need to review that information and share it back with them. And I think that helps. A lot of people say, I don't want to survey my franchisees because I know that they don't like this, and we're not going to change it. And that's fine. You guys are in charge of moving the brand forward and doing the right things to support and grow their business. But sometimes when you use this method, you can get their expectation, and then you can use that information to show that you're listening to them and go back to them. It's a lot of sometimes that action that you see here, that act, is not always making the changes to fit your franchisees' want, but more of explaining the why behind the things that you're doing, the changes that you're implementing, or the processes that you've put in place. So I think it can help really align what your franchisees are doing or what they're seeing that you're asking them to do, and help them accept it a little bit more when they see that there's this much thought put into it. And then you go back again and you keep measuring where you're at. Looking at how they felt 2 years ago, relying on your gut isn't always the best way to make sure that you guys are explaining well the decisions behind your changes or your initiatives that you're rolling out to them. So that's it for that point, Eric, if you want to take the next one.
Yeah, no, that's great, and that really sets up point number 3, which is building franchisee engagement. And again, what a lot of people lose sight of is people buy franchises. Most of the people that buy franchises are kind of in that belonger personality group. So when you think of someone, anybody can obviously go out and start their own business, but they're buying a franchise because they want that community. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And, it's really important to involve franchisees in that process at the corporate level of the decision making and where the brand is going. and not just dictating to them, how things are going to be run. And that's, it is challenging. I know a lot of franchisors struggle with, especially franchisors in the food industry that may have some corporate stores, a lot of corporate stores versus franchise stores, and sometimes it's easier to get things done if you can just have a decision and tell your managers to do it. In franchising, that doesn't work so well. When you make a decision to corporate and tell franchisees this is how we're doing it and it's our way or the highway, I think we all have had experiences where something like that has backfired really bad. And so you really want to engage franchisees as early as possible in any process and continually engage them throughout all decisions in the company. Franchisees are going to understand that ultimately the final decision is up to corporate, and that may rest in the CEO, it may rest in other departments, but they just want to be involved and they just want to be heard. And the more you can do that through your getting your advisory councils and much more engaged, getting lots of different committees set up for every major initiative, whether it's your annual conference or a technology committee for looking at a new POS system, or a communications committee to look at ways to better keep the network appraised of what's going on. Again, franchisees just want to be heard and participate in that and feel like that they're valued. And it's really important to keep that in mind, and again, have your staff especially understand that they feel like they own the brand just as much as you do, and so you want to make sure that involvement is really evident. Another thing that we see all the time is in some of the more successful brands is what we call performance groups or peer groups. And again, it's working with franchisees, helping them kind of find their own solution, and that way they'll own the solution much more effectively. And whether it's performance groups where they get together in small groups and share financials and best practices and help each other make their businesses better, or in many cases, like in our case, when we do a survey and we're feeding back the survey results, or helping the franchisor share the survey results back with their franchisee community, it's sharing the results back and saying, here's where we're good, here's where we need to do some work, and let's do some brainstorming around those issues and come up with some strategies to address that, as opposed to the opposite, where a client may get their survey results back and go off-site with their executive team and come up with solutions to address certain issues that they have within a network, and then announcing those plans back to the franchisee network. That generally falls flat. I mean, again, the more you can engage franchisees in the solution up front and pick their brains, ultimately the decisions and the results that come out of those meetings are going to be the same you probably would have done on your own, but the franchisees are going to own it. They're going to be much more receptive, and it'll just be a lot easier to get changes made through the system. And Michelle's going to talk a little bit about the franchisee life cycle, but it's really important to understand the unique relationship between a franchisor and a franchisee, and educate your franchisee candidates long before they come into the system as to what that's like to be a franchisee, what is the responsibilities of a franchisee, how you're involved, how the decisions are made in the organization, and set that expectation up front. Because again, as we said, as long as they have a clear expectation coming in, you'll have a much easier time getting done and things implemented throughout the system.
Yeah, and Eric, before I jump into this too, a couple other things too, that a lot of people will talk about how you can start by building engagement at your conferences. So when you have them in person, you kind of start having those conversations there, and you can easily connect your franchisees with more of the franchisees that are more in the same part of this cycle that we're talking about. So if you can connect franchisees by where their business challenges lie, you can start getting them to really get more engaged in the brand and helping each other as well. So that was just one thing I wanted to throw in there. So
great point.
The franchisee and the franchisor life cycle, and we're going to start with the franchisee life cycle and using some information from Greg Nathan with the Franchise Relationships Institute. He's always got fantastic events and really operationally focused, but he talks about these different stages of a franchisee's life cycle, very similar to what we've all probably read. You know, it makes sense when a franchisee first signs on. They should be loving you. They're soaking in all the information you're giving them. They're drinking the Kool-Aid. They love your brand. They're leaning on you for support. And then as their business sets in, they start focusing on every dime that they're paying you and making sure that they see value for each of those things that are coming in. And then they start getting into that, okay, what about me? What am I getting out of this relationship? What are you doing for my business? So as that kind of dip starts going down, they might tend to pull away from you. They might not accept those changes. And it's really important if you can start talking about this change ahead of time. It makes it easier when they start coming to that point where you're butting heads, where they want to pull away, to say, you know, remember when you came on board, we said probably 5 years down the road you were going to start thinking you had this whole thing figured out and you really didn't need us anymore. And we're going to bring you back into the fold. You know, we're going to get you reacquainted with the tools and the support that we have to offer, and help remind you of the reasons that you're with a franchise brand over being out on your own, working for somebody else. And as they start to turn that corner, if you can kind of get ahead of it and you know it's coming, you can pull them in a lot quicker and get them back into the fold and really helping you guys drive the brand forward. And you come back to that point where you guys are aligning what your goals are for both their personal business and for the business, the overall growth of the brand itself. So I think, you know, Greg Nathan has a few books. I know that he does events. He's got stuff available on YouTube. If you're not familiar with him, I do think that it's worth checking him out if you want to understand this life cycle a little bit more. And I don't think it's something that you need to keep to yourself. I think sharing it with a franchisee ahead of time or when they're young and in love with you is great. It just makes it an easier conversation when things get a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, it's a great point, Michelle.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that the Greg's books, especially his two books, the Franchisee Factor and Profitable Partnerships. I know both of them are available online. Not to make a shameless plug, we don't make any money on them, but I think those should be required reading for everybody that's a franchisee candidate coming in, you know, potentially considering coming into your system, because it does a great job of explaining, you know, what franchising is all about and what that relationship is all about. And like you said, I mean, you set this expectation up front. You know, everybody's going to go through this life cycle. Some may go through it faster than others, but everybody's going to hit those, you know, high points and low points. And if you address it up front and at least educate them on it, so, you know, when they get there, you can say, see, I told you so, and it just makes that conversation easier and helps them get out of that trough, if you will, a lot faster.
Yeah, and I was going to mention too, just making sure that you kind of hit it too, that your staff is aware of this life cycle so that they don't take it personally when that franchisee hits that down slope, and it's really just more about bringing them back into the fold rather than getting your feelings hurt over what's a very normal outlook on the business at that point. And then the next slide here. This research project that we did was Zoracle. So Zoracle kind of takes that whole idea of profiling your franchisees or your top performers and becoming more predictive about what's going to come, and, you know, how can you avoid those relationship struggles beforehand. So here, what they do when they look at their stages of growth, they're focused on the franchisor, their stage of growth. This is not the franchisee's business. This is the franchisor's business. So the idea behind this research is that the training and support demands change based on where you are as a franchisor in that stage. So when the franchise system becomes more established and is growing bigger, the top performers seem to not need as much of those resources and those costs that go into supporting those franchisees. So how can you get better ahead of that and plan for the ways that your system support and training needs will change. How will those demands change once you have more franchisees on board? How are those ratios going to change, whether it's in field or in the corporate office, to really support your franchise system? What technology can you bring in that will help you oversee that support, and just really getting ahead of those things so that you are investing in the right technology, people, and resources, and not backtracking to pick up and clean things up. So this is data that we did last year for the Franchise Update Leadership Conference. We are doing this again with Rebecca from Zoracle as well. So if you are interested, it's a two-part survey. You do your overall system with us, and then the top performers, you identify them based on its revenue, it's that they're really good at following your systems. However you decide who those top performing franchisees are, they do a second set of questions, and then it's all tied together to give you back this information about your top performers versus the rest of the system. And then you also get that benchmarking information against other brands.
And I just wanted to jump into and answer, we'll jump back to the franchisee stages. Just a quick question that we had from the audience as far as what's the typical timeline it takes to have a franchisee go through this. And it's really all over the map. I mean, it's obviously dependent on your system and training. It's dependent on obviously the franchisee themselves and the type of person that they are. You know, typically you're probably looking at several years before they, you know, get all the way through this and come out the other end, hopefully coming back up. Some obviously crash and burn and never make it out of that low point. But, you know, again, the more you can do up front to educate franchise candidates about these stages and what's typical, and get them talking with franchisees and say, yeah, you know, that's exactly how I felt, you know, 6 months in, a year in, whatever. It's just going to help expedite that and get them moving quickly. And having your staff understand that, as we've said, really helps, you know, when you do have a change or something you're trying to implement, you know, a lot of the attitudes and the stages they may be in, you'll be like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just jumping here to our last point, I want to, you know, kind of wrap things up here so we have a few minutes of Q&A at the end. Is really what I want to just talk about is franchisee vision planning. And in franchising, we talk a lot about the vision of the brand, and especially at the franchisor corporate office, you know, that's what the focus is always on. You know, what's the brand vision? Where is the company going? You know, what's our story? What's our history? And we often lose sight of the fact, obviously, as franchisors, we're very protective of our brand and we're very emotional about our brand. But what you have to understand is franchisees are just using your brand as a vehicle to get to what their goal and vision is in life. You know, that's really the short of it, is that your brand is just a vehicle for them to achieve some level of financial independence, hopefully, and some level of freedom as far as being a business owner. But you really need to understand what their vision is as a franchisee, and that's going to help you and help them get their business to where it needs to go. Especially, again, those frontline support people that are working with your franchisees day in and day out. If they're just going in saying, you know, this is where the brand's going, this is what you need to do, you know, if it's all about the brand and you need to get on board, you know, you're just going to run into resistance all the time. But if that same person understands that franchisee's goals, knows what they're looking to get into, you know, they're into it for 5 years and, you know, they want to buy a house, whatever it is, or maybe they're, you know, into it much more long term, they got to get their kids through college, whatever their financial goals are and the vision for the business, that needs to be the focus of their support. And then when they do get off track, it's very easy to just say, hey, look, you know, I want to help you get to, you know, get Jimmy through college, or again, whatever those goals happen to be, and really make it personal for that franchisee. And that'll be so much more easier to get that person turned around and get them on track and get them performing where they should be, as opposed to just kind of always pushing the vision of the brand down their throat. So I highly recommend doing vision planning within your system and have your franchisees explain what their vision and goals are if you haven't already. This is a great exercise to actually do as part of Discovery Day, is have your candidates make a presentation at Discovery Day about their vision and plans and how they want to achieve those goals through your business model. Talk about a powerful opportunity. That's a great way to, and really vet out who your best candidates are, is to have them do that at Discovery Day and get it early, and then as they become franchisees, make sure that the support people are on board and know exactly what those goals are and help them achieve those goals through your vision.
Very nice. I know that people have been using that at their conferences lately and using that for that discussion of planning and that goal alignment, so that's great. So that's it for us today. I think we have, Mike, if we have a couple questions, if you want to throw them. I don't know if we answered them all offline. But we would love to get everyone more involved in the two studies that we have coming up. One is the gap that we were talking about, the franchisor and the franchisee perceptions of the business outlook. We will be doing that again if you'd like more details on that. And then the ongoing research that we do measuring franchisee feedback and your top performers, we can give you information on that as well. Mike, do you want to throw a couple of the questions out?
Yeah, I have a question here, and if anybody has any more to bring in, we do have a couple of minutes, so feel free. But the question I wanted to ask was, again, related to the stages of the franchisee relationship. There's that obvious dip that we talked about, but how, as a franchisor, can you differentiate a more serious disengagement, so a really problematic disengagement from just that natural lull that comes in the middle?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, one of the things is, the actions of the franchisee obviously speak volumes. And so, obviously every franchisee is unique, and you all have, very different franchisees within your system. Sometimes the most engaged franchisees, they can, quite frankly, be a pain in the ass. I mean, it's pardon my French, but they love the brand, they love the business, but they push you every day to get better, and they question things that you do, and so that abrasion, can sometimes be taken negatively, especially at lower level support people or operations people. They're just like, I don't want to, I can't talk to that guy today, or whoever it happens to be, and I just don't want to take their call. They're just it's just too much. But that franchisee, that's a great franchisee to have, because they're going to challenge you. They're going to make sure that you're moving the brand in the right direction and doing the right thing. So it's not always about having happy, smiley franchisees that just love everything that you do. The bigger challenge, I think, is when a franchisee goes dark on you and they're not communicating, and that can be scary. And you obviously you don't know if they're consulting with attorneys or if they're who they're talking to. But if they're not communicating, that's a big red flag, and certainly you want to get on a plane as fast as you can and get face to face with that person. I mean, there's really you can do some things over the phone, but when you have a situation like that, you got to get face to face. And if someone from the senior management team can go meet with that person, CEO, president, or other senior staff, I think that's a thing that needs to happen as soon as possible, and get that person re-engaged. And sometimes you can't, there's just differences that can't be met, and so the best thing is to just that person get out of your system. And they may not be happy, but if you can do everything you can to end the relationship in an equitable way, that's probably the best thing. It certainly beats the legal response and sending them a letter and threatening. I mean, it just help them move on and get out of their system, and it'll save you a lot of time and energy and sleepless nights as well.
Yeah, and I would say too, I would add to that there's also warning signs if they're not showing up to regional meetings. If you do have performance groups, if you're giving them opportunities to engage with other franchisees in your system, and you're seeing them pull away from that, so try engaging other franchisees to find out what's going on. If you haven't advice council, having them reach out to find out if there's something going on that maybe they'll open up to someone else in the system, but not necessarily to you. But not getting calls back or not wanting to meet with people in the field, I think that those are big warning signs that that engagement level is kind of slipping, and doing what you can to try and bring them in before it gets to that situation where they're proactively avoiding your interactions is a good thing to try. And Mike, I see one other question about other ways to learn more about ways to help support your franchisees and their business, which is a great opportunity for me to just mention that we did earlier this year. That is something that you can find on our website. You actually can get CFE credits for it this year as well. But that was an amazing session that we did. It was 5 different sessions. We had, I think, at least three people on each panel. So there's a lot of information in that if you want to check that out. Mike, is there one other question that we can take? I know we're a minute over.
No, I think you actually have everything covered.
Okay, good. Yeah, so then I'll just leave it with, if anyone is going to the FAN meeting down in DC, September 28th, Eric and I will both be there. We'd love to catch up with you in person, or at the Leadership and Development Conference in October down in Atlanta. But please let us know if you'd like to participate in any of our research, or you do have additional questions for us. The deadline to be included for this next round is September 30th. So thank